1 million people lived in ancient Rome without a single water pump. This was the first megacity, and its survival hinged on a hidden masterpiece of engineering. By the end of this story, you will understand the 5 core principles that allowed an empire to conquer its own thirst. We will uncover how they moved rivers across stone, why their pipes might not have poisoned them, and what really happened when the water finally stopped flowing. Their greatest monument was not a temple or a palace, but a network of water. How does a civilization build something meant to outlast itself? The Tiber River was a lifeline that had become a liability. Winding through the heart of the city, its waters were not just a source of life, but also a repository for everything a crowded metropolis produced. Think of the sheer volume. Hundreds of thousands of people, their daily activities, their workshops, their public baths, all draining into that single, sluggish channel. The river became a murky, unreliable source, prone to drying up in summer heat and flooding with filth in the rainy seasons. For the small village Rome once was, this was manageable. For an imperial capital swelling toward 1 million souls, it was a recipe for catastrophe. This scarcity shaped daily life in profound and difficult ways. Most Romans lived in towering apartment blocks called insulae, often 6 or 7 stories high, and not a single one had running water. Every drop for drinking, cooking, and washing had to be carried up narrow, dark stairways from public wells or fountains at street level. These wells, tapping into the local groundwater, were themselves vulnerable to contamination from the very waste the city struggled to manage. The threat of waterborne illness was a constant, quiet shadow over every neighborhood. Public health, economic growth, even social stability, all were held back by this single, pressing limitation. A city cannot become an empire if its people are perpetually one drought or one outbreak away from crisis. Rome's leaders faced a stark reality. They could not make more water appear within the city's boundaries. The local sources were exhausted and compromised. So they made a decision of breathtaking ambition. If the water would not come to Rome, Rome would go to the water. They would look beyond their hills, beyond the polluted Tiber Valley, to the pristine mountain ranges miles away. This was not about digging a better well. It was about redefining a city's relationship with its environment on a geographic scale never before attempted. They decided to build artificial rivers in stone to redirect the very watershed of the region toward a single point, the heart of the empire. This was the genesis of their hydraulic revolution, born not from convenience but from sheer, undeniable need. The shackle of scarcity was about to be broken by the weight of Roman engineering. The true genius of their solution lay in a principle so simple it seems invisible. They mastered gravity not by defying it but by partnering with it on an epic scale. An aqueduct is not merely a bridge of arches, though those are its most dramatic landmarks. It is, at its heart, a meticulously tilted stone channel. Imagine needing to pour water from a pitcher on a table into a cup on the floor. You would not throw it, you would simply tip the pitcher and let nature do the work. Roman engineers performed this exact feat across 50 miles of rugged countryside. Their goal was a slope so gentle, so perfectly calculated, that water would move with a steady, relentless push, never rushing fast enough to erode the channel and never slowing enough to stagnate. They achieved gradients often shallower than 1 foot of drop for every 1,000 feet of length. To put that in perspective, over a mile, the channel would descend only about 5 inches. Maintaining this precise angle across hills, valleys, and uneven terrain was their monumental challenge. Their secret weapon was a tool called the Corobates. This was a long, leveled wooden frame with a central groove filled with water, acting as a massive, hyper-accurate spirit level. Surveyors would use it to sight along the planned route, ensuring their stone river would have that perfect, imperceptible tilt from source to city. This was the first and most critical principle. The aqueduct was not a water delivery system. It was a controlled, eternal waterfall laid on its side, a perpetual motion machine powered by nothing but the weight of the water itself and the unerring geometry of Roman ambition. Every other innovation in their water network would build upon this foundational idea of effortless, gravity-fed flow. These artificial rivers needed a birthplace, a source as perfect as the engineering that would carry it. So teams of Roman surveyors and hydrologists left the crowded, noisy streets of the capital and ventured into the silent, green wilderness of the Apennine foothills. Their mission was not just to find water, but to find the right water. The architect Vitruvius laid out the ideal criteria in his writings. The water had to be clear and bright to the eye, cold to the taste, and it had to flow from a spring head, a caput aquae, located at an elevation substantially higher than the final destination in Rome. This last point was non-negotiable. Gravity was their engine, and the elevation difference was their fuel, but their search was about more than just physics. It was a profound understanding of public health, centuries before the germ theory of disease. They knew empirically that water from clear, fast-moving mountain springs resulted in fewer health challenges for the population. Water that had filtered through layers of rock and soil was visibly better, cleaner, cooler, free of the murk and odor that plagued the Tiber and the inner city wells. So they sought out springs emerging from protected, wooded areas, places far from farms or settlements that could pollute the watershed. They were not just capturing water, they were capturing purity itself. This strategic choice created the famous Roman preference for aqueduct water over any other source. To drink from a public fountain fed by the Aqua Marcia or the Aqua Claudia was to taste the distant mountains, a daily reminder of the empire's reach and its care for its people. By investing immense effort to tap these remote sources, they guaranteed the metropolis an abundance of something even more valuable than water. They guaranteed it a foundation of health. The longevity of the city, its ability to sustain such a dense population without constant crisis, was rooted in these quiet, hidden springs miles away. The journey of a single drop from a mossy stone in a sun-dappled forest to a bustling fountain in the Forum was the empire's greatest act of preventative medicine. But capturing this perfect source was only the first step. The real test was building a conduit that could protect that purity across every mile of the long, vulnerable journey to the city walls. This hidden journey began the moment the water left its spring. To protect its clarity and coolness, Roman engineers made a choice that seems counterintuitive today. They buried it. For every mile of dramatic, arching bridgework we associate with aqueducts, there were often 5 or 6 miles of silent, subterranean tunnel. This was the second principle, the unseen backbone of the entire system, the specus. This was the waterproof conduit, the actual stone throat through which the mountain water flowed. Building it was an act of sheer, relentless labor. Teams of workers, often soldiers from the legions, would carve directly through living rock or dig deep trenches that were then lined with stone and a revolutionary type of concrete. They sealed every seam with a special, brilliantly effective mortar called opus signinum. This was a mixture of lime and crushed terracotta, which created a hard, pinkish, almost glassy surface that was remarkably impervious to water. It was this hidden liner, not the grand arches, that kept the water pure and prevented it from seeping into the surrounding earth. The logic was profoundly pragmatic. An underground channel was a masterpiece of efficiency. It shielded the water from the evaporating heat of the Italian sun. It protected it from dust, debris, and any potential surface contamination. And in a time of conflict, it made the lifeblood of the city virtually invulnerable to sabotage. An enemy army could topple a section of arches, but how do you attack a river buried beneath 20 feet of solid earth? For the average person walking the countryside between Rome and the mountains, the system was a ghost. The landscape appeared ordinary, just fields and hills. Only the occasional, evenly spaced maintenance shaft, a simple stone cylinder poking up from the grass, hinted at the hidden world below. Through those shafts, the aquarii, the water wardens, could descend to inspect and clean the channel. But for everyone else, it was a complete secret. 1 million people in the city were drinking, bathing, and thriving because of an artificial river they would never see, flowing with a quiet, constant whisper 50 feet beneath the shepherds and their flocks. This was the essence of Roman engineering, not just spectacle but profound, invisible reliability. The grandeur was for the city's pride, but the buried tunnel was for the city's survival. Yet, even this protected channel could not ignore the geography of Italy. The straight, gentle slope demanded by gravity eventually met an impassable obstacle, a deep valley or a wide river plain. Here, the hidden river had to rise into the light, and in doing so, it created the iconic image that would define hydraulic ambition for 2,000 years. When the buried channel met a valley it could not go around, it performed a miracle of stone. It rose from the earth. This is the moment the aqueduct became a monument, the point where pure function transformed into an unforgettable symbol. Those towering arcades of arches were not decorative afterthoughts. They were the direct, logical consequence of the first principle, gravity. To maintain that perfectly calculated, gentle slope across a depression in the land, the stone channel had to be lifted onto a bridge. And that bridge had to be a masterpiece of structural efficiency. The Roman arch was the perfect solution. Its curved form channeled the immense weight of the water-filled conduit and the masonry itself down through the piers and into the ground, distributing force with an elegance that straight beams could never match. This allowed them to span wide spaces with minimal material, creating airy, stable roadways for water that seemed to defy their own mass. The secret ingredient holding it all together was a technological marvel, Roman concrete. Unlike modern concrete, which requires dry conditions to cure, this ancient mixture used a special volcanic ash called Pozzolana. When mixed with lime and water, it created a paste that would actually harden and grow stronger when submerged. This hydraulic concrete was the glue of the empire, allowing them to build piers in riverbeds and create structures that were not just strong, but resilient to the very element they carried. The arcade was a statement written across the horizon. For a traveler approaching Rome, the sight of these graceful, repetitive arches marching across the countryside was a visceral announcement of imperial power. It said that Rome did not adapt to the landscape, it commanded the landscape. A natural barrier like a valley was not an obstacle, it was a canvas. The pure, cold water from a distant mountain was now flowing over the heads of the local farmers and shepherds, a daily, silent demonstration of where the center of the world truly lay. This visible architecture served a dual purpose that was brilliantly calculated. Functionally, it protected the gradient. Symbolically, it imprinted the idea of Roman order onto the very land. It was infrastructure as ideology, but this grand procession of water did not end at a reservoir on the city's edge. Its final, most ingenious act was about to begin, where the single, mighty stream from the mountains would be transformed into 1,000 threads of public life. The arcade delivered the water to the city walls, but what happened next would determine whether 1 million people could actually use it. The Grand Arcade delivered its crystal cargo to the very edge of Rome, but the journey was not yet complete. Before a single drop could grace a public fountain, it had to pass through a final, critical checkpoint. At the terminus of every aqueduct just outside the city walls, the water would flow into a vast, tranquil pool known as a piscina limaria, a settling tank. This was where Roman engineering addressed a simple, gritty reality. Even water from a pristine mountain spring, after traveling 50 miles in an open stone channel, would pick up fine particles of sand, silt, and debris. Letting that abrasive grit flow into the city's delicate pipe network would have been disastrous, causing rapid wear and constant blockages, so they built a pause into the system. Here, in these large, open-air reservoirs, the water's relentless forward motion finally stopped. The flow slowed to a gentle creep, and in that stillness, gravity performed a second, quieter miracle. All the suspended particles, no longer carried by the current, slowly drifted down to settle on the broad, flat bottom of the tank. What flowed out the other side was water visually transformed, its legendary clarity restored. The system even included a brilliant feature for maintenance. Sluice gates built into the base of the tank could be opened periodically, flushing out the accumulated sediment to keep the process efficient. This step reveals a profound layer of their thinking. The aqueduct was not a static monument. It was a living system designed for perpetual operation. They understood that infrastructure requires not just construction, but ongoing care. The settling tank is a humble, almost invisible piece of the puzzle, yet it speaks volumes about their practical genius. It represents an early, masterful application of sedimentation, a fundamental principle of water treatment still used in every modern plant on Earth. They weren't just moving water, they were perfecting it, ensuring that what reached their citizens was not just abundant, but genuinely clean. This pre-treatment was the essential handoff, the moment the macro-engineering of the arcades transitioned into the micro-engineering of urban distribution. Now perfectly clear and calm, the water was ready for its most complex task, weaving itself into the very fabric of the city. From the serene clarity of the settling tank, the water embarked on its final, most critical transformation. It flowed into the true heart of the system, a building known as the castellum aquae, the water castle. This was not a reservoir for storage, but a dynamic distribution hub, the central switchboard for the entire city's water supply. Imagine the terminal of the great aqua marcia, where the flow from multiple aqueducts could converge into one vast covered basin. Inside, the priorities of an empire were written in bronze and lead. The Roman water commissioner Frontinus left us a meticulous description of this space. The main flow first passed through bronze grating, a final sieve to catch any last fragments of debris. Then it reached the master control point. The basin was fitted with a series of precisely calibrated outlet pipes, each leading to a different lead conduit that snaked away into the city's subterranean maze. This was where a single, mighty river was divided into many streams, each with a designated destiny. One large pipe might be dedicated solely to supplying the city's sprawling public bath complexes, which required a staggering, continuous flow. Another set of pipes served the neighborhood fountains, the Nymphaea, ensuring every citizen had access to clean water within a short walk. A third, smaller set of conduits carried water under special license to the private villas of senators and wealthy patrons, a privilege for which they paid handsomely into the state's coffers. The genius of the castellum was its embodiment of systematic control. By adjusting the flow into these different pipelines, the water wardens could effectively prioritize the city's needs. In a time of drought or during repairs to one aqueduct, they could reduce supply to the baths or private homes to preserve the essential flow to the public fountains. This was urban planning on a hydrological level, a concept directly akin to a modern municipal water authority managing pressure zones and allocation. It transformed water from a mere natural resource into a calibrated public utility. The castellum aquae was the brain of the operation, a place where logistics met morality, ensuring the lifeblood of the city was allocated not by chaos or wealth alone, but by a calculated order that placed communal survival at its core. From this quiet, administrative heart, the water now entered its most intimate phase, traveling through the dark veins of the city to reach every street and every citizen. From the castellum, the water entered a network that reflected the very values of the society it served. The distribution followed a strict, logical, and deeply revealing hierarchy. The first and largest share of the flow was not directed toward palaces or monuments, but to the most humble and essential feature of Roman street life, the lacus. These were not ornate sculptures for decoration, but simple, robust basins built at major intersections and along narrow alleyways. For the vast majority of Rome's inhabitants, the millions living in those cramped, waterless apartment blocks, the lacus was the sole source of water for every daily need. Here, people would gather with their clay jars and bronze buckets, filling them with cold, clear mountain water that had traveled miles to reach their neighborhood. This was not a privilege, it was a guaranteed public right, provided free of charge by the state. The constant flow from these fountains served a crucial sanitary purpose as well, flushing the gutters of the streets and carrying away waste. By ensuring this universal access, the system performed its most vital function. It maintained a baseline of public health and social stability for the entire, teeming population. A citizen who could reliably drink clean water and wash was a citizen less likely to fall ill and less likely to riot. The lacus turned a logistical achievement into a social contract written in water. The second great priority of the system flowed toward the monumental thermae, the vast public bath complexes. To call these mere baths is to profoundly underestimate their role. They were the community centers, the gymnasiums, and the social hubs of the ancient city. Places like the baths of Caracalla or the baths of Diocletian were engineering marvels in their own right, requiring a staggering, continuous torrent of water to fill their massive cold pools, warm pools, and hot steam rooms. Supplying them was a non-negotiable demand. The baths represented the Roman ideal of civilized life, where hygiene, recreation, and culture intertwined. For a small fee, any citizen, from a wealthy merchant to a lowly laborer, could spend an afternoon bathing, exercising, reading in the library, or conducting business. By prioritizing the thermae, the water system funded a cornerstone of daily culture, promoting cleanliness, leisure, and a shared civic identity. It was an investment in the social fabric, using water to weave the disparate threads of 1 million people into a cohesive urban community. Only after these two great public needs were fully satisfied did the remaining water flow into private channels. Through a system of official licenses and heavy taxes, the wealthy could pay for a lead pipe, called a fistula, to be connected from the main line directly into their townhouses or suburban villas. This was a luxury, a clear symbol of status, but it was always secondary. Industrial users, like fullers cleaning cloth or tanneries processing hides, could also secure a licensed supply, but again, only from the surplus. This hierarchy was not an accident. It was the third core principle of the entire enterprise: prioritized public access. The system was designed first and foremost to prevent crisis, to ensure the multitude in the crowded city cores had the water needed for basic survival and sanitation. The private and commercial flows were a useful byproduct, a way to recoup state revenue and service the economy, but they were never allowed to compromise the primary mission. In this, we see a remarkably modern concept, the idea of a public utility. The Roman state, through its engineering and administration, took responsibility for a fundamental human need, managing it not for profit, but for the common good and the preservation of order. The quiet hum of the fountain in the street was the sound of that contract being kept day after day, year after year. Yet this brilliant network of lead pipes, which made such precise distribution possible, has long been shadowed by a persistent modern question: did the very material that delivered Rome's lifeblood also secretly poison its people? The water's journey did not end in a pipe or a tap. It culminated in a public performance across Rome. From the grandest imperial forum to the quietest neighborhood crossroads, the city spoke in the language of flowing water. This was the final, glorious transformation of the aqueduct's gift, turning a life-sustaining utility into an experience for all the senses. The simple street basin, the lacus, was just the beginning. The Romans elevated the fountain into an art form, the Nymphaeum. These were not mere basins but elaborate architectural wonders, often multi-storied facades adorned with statues of gods, nymphs, and emperors, all framed by columns and cascading sheets of water. The water did not just flow from a spout, it danced over marble steps, filled reflecting pools, and sparkled in the sunlight. To stand before a great Nymphaeum was to witness the empire's bounty made animate, a celebration of the natural world perfected by human hands. But this beauty was deeply practical. In the heat of a Roman summer, the constant evaporation from these fountains cooled the surrounding air, creating pockets of microclimate in sun-baked plazas. The never-ending murmur and splash provided a soothing ambient soundscape, a natural white noise that softened the clamor of cartwheels, market vendors, and the general din of a million people living on top of one another. These fountains created oases of calm and sensory relief, essential respites in the overwhelming intensity of the ancient city. More than anything, they were a daily, democratic lesson in civics. Every citizen, regardless of wealth, could share in this beauty. A laborer filling a jar at a modest corner fountain was using the same water, drawn from the same distant mountain, that graced the emperor's most ornate Nymphaeum. This shared resource became a powerful symbol of shared identity. The fountains were perpetual, visible proof of the state's commitment to its people, a monument that could not be ignored because it was woven into the routine of every single day. They made the invisible engineering of the aqueducts gloriously, tangibly real. The system was not hidden away, it was showcased, inviting pride and reinforcing order. The sound of water was the sound of Rome functioning. The sight of it was a reminder of the peace and prosperity that good government could provide. It turned a logistical triumph into a psychological one, assuring the populace that they were cared for by a power capable of bending nature itself to its will. This symphony of fountains was the ultimate destination for the mountain streams, a final, elegant proof that the empire understood a profound truth. Infrastructure succeeds not when it is merely efficient, but when it elevates the human spirit. But for every drop of pristine mountain water that flowed into Rome, another question demanded an answer. Where did it all go? A city of 1 million people, with its vast baths and endless fountains, generates a corresponding river of waste. The same civilization that mastered the art of bringing water in had to confront the monumental challenge of sending it out. Their solution lay not in the sunlit hills, but in the dark heart of the city itself, in an engineering marvel so foundational it became a legend, the Cloaca Maxima, the greatest sewer. Its story begins not with imperial ambition, but with a simple, muddy problem. In the earliest days of Rome, the valley that would become the Forum Romanum was a marshy, unhealthy bog, prone to flooding from the Tiber and local streams. To make the land usable for public life, the early Romans, possibly under the orders of an Etruscan king, performed a radical act of landscape surgery. They channelized and deepened a natural stream, turning it into a dedicated drainage canal that cut through the center of the lowland, directing stormwater and runoff straight into the Tiber. This was the humble, pragmatic birth of what would become one of history's most famous pieces of infrastructure. Over centuries, as Rome grew from a town to a global capital, the Cloaca was transformed. What began as an open ditch was gradually lined with stone, and then, in a stroke of engineering brilliance, was vaulted over with a massive ceiling of stone blocks, creating a hidden, subterranean canal wide enough for a small boat to navigate. It became a monument in reverse, a cathedral of outflow buried beneath the feet of the citizens. Its primary mission was public and practical. It drained the Forum and the valleys between the city's famous hills, carrying away the torrents of seasonal rain that would otherwise turn the civic center into a lake. By managing this stormwater, it prevented catastrophic floods and transformed a once unhealthy swamp into the stable, paved heart of the empire. This points to a critical, often overlooked aspect of Roman urban planning. They did not see water management as a single problem of supply. They understood it as a holistic cycle, a balance of inflow and outflow. The aqueducts and the Cloaca Maxima were two halves of the same system, a conscious, engineered metabolism for the city. A common modern myth suggests every Roman home had a flush toilet connected to this great sewer. In reality, that was a luxury for the very few. Most insulae apartments had no such connections. Waste from chamber pots was typically collected and emptied into large, lined cesspits located in building basements or courtyards, where it could be periodically cleaned out by collectors, or sometimes simply dumped into the open street gutters that were flushed by overflow from the public fountains. The Cloaca's genius was not in creating a city-wide sanitary sewer in the modern sense, but in solving a macro-level civic problem. It protected the city's central nervous system, the forum, from water damage. It provided a main artery for the runoff that washed the streets, carrying that diluted waste toward the Tiber. In doing so, it showcased a profound, holistic view of urban hydrology. The Romans knew that a city's health depended as much on what it removed as on what it provided. The silent, steady flow of the Cloaca Maxima beneath the bustling forum was the necessary counterpart to the sparkling fountains above, a reminder that true civilization requires mastering both the light and the shadow of daily life. This grand cycle of water from mountain spring to Tiber River was the engine of the metropolis, yet for all its sophistication, this entire majestic system relied on a hidden world of daily, gritty labor to keep it alive. The quiet hum of the street fountain was a prelude to a grander symphony of water. To truly grasp the scale of Roman ambition, you had to step inside one of their great bath complexes, like the Baths of Caracalla. This was not a building, it was a hydrological city within a city. Picture a vast, echoing hall of marble and light, where thousands of citizens moved through a daily ritual of cleansing and conversation. The air itself was thick with warmth and the sound of splashing, a testament to an empire that had mastered water not just for survival, but for profound, communal pleasure. Meeting the demands of this place required an engineering subsystem as sophisticated as the aqueducts themselves. High above the bathers' heads, in the cavernous attic spaces of the complex, sat a series of enormous lead-lined cisterns. These were the bath's private reservoirs, constantly replenished by a dedicated branch of the aqueduct. Their elevated position was crucial. It created the water pressure needed to feed a dazzling array of features. From these cisterns, a network of pipes branched out like arteries. Some delivered a constant, cold stream to the frigidarium, the chilling plunge pool. Others fed a boiler room where a wood-fired furnace, the hypocaust, worked its magic. This furnace did more than just heat a cauldron of water for the coldarium, the hot bath. Its genius was in its radiant design. The furnace's hot gases were channeled through a hollow space beneath the bathhouse floors, which stood on countless tiny brick pillars, and through box tiles embedded in the walls. This turned the entire architecture into a gentle, enveloping radiator, warming the marble benches and the air itself. The used water, now soapy and lukewarm, did not simply vanish. It was funneled through its own dedicated drains, joining the larger outflow of the city in a continuous cycle. Every step of the process, from the cold mountain water entering the attic cisterns to the warm waste draining away, was a miniature replica of Rome's entire water philosophy. Storage, heating, pressurized distribution, and managed drainage all contained under one magnificent roof. The baths were the ultimate expression of water's cultural role. Here, personal hygiene was transformed into a social sacrament, a shared experience of leisure and luxury made possible by engineered abundance. To bathe was to participate in a civic ritual. to feel the direct, tangible benefit of an empire that could command rivers of stone. It was a daily reminder that water, in Roman hands, was not merely a resource, it was the very medium of civilized life. Yet for all its splendor, this magnificent water network had a dark lining, one that has haunted its legacy for centuries. The very pipes that carried life through the city were often made of a material we now know to be poisonous, lead. This fact has spawned one of the most persistent theories about Rome's decline, the idea that the empire was slowly, unknowingly poisoning itself, that lead pipes drove its elites to madness and its society to collapse. It is a compelling, almost poetic narrative of self-inflicted doom, a civilization undone by its own ingenuity. But like many good stories, the truth is far more nuanced, and modern science has begun to unravel this historical mystery. The Romans did use lead extensively for their distribution pipes, the fistulae. These were cast in sheets, rolled into tubes, and soldered with lead alloy. There is no debating the basic toxicology. Lead is a potent neurotoxin, and chronic exposure can lead to severe health issues. The question is not about the danger of the material, but about the actual risk within the specific, engineered environment the Romans created. Several remarkable factors acted as unintended safeguards. The first was the chemistry of the water itself. The aqueducts drew from limestone-rich mountain springs, which meant the water was naturally hard, saturated with dissolved minerals like calcium carbonate. As this mineral-rich water flowed through the lead pipes, those minerals did not stay dissolved. They began to precipitate out, adhering to the interior walls of the conduit. Over time, this built up a thick, rock-like lining called creta aquaria, a crusty scale that completely insulated the water from the toxic lead surface. In many excavated pipes, this lining is several centimeters thick, effectively turning a lead conduit into a stone one. The water was not touching lead at all for most of the pipe's operational life. The second factor was the system's brilliant design principle of constant flow. Remember, the vast majority of citizens got their water not from a stagnant kitchen tap, but from the continuously rushing public fountains. Water did not sit for long periods in the lead pipes, which is when leaching would be most severe. It was always moving, always fresh. Furthermore, the cold temperature of the mountain water further reduced the chemical reactivity that could draw lead into solution. Recent scientific studies analyzing traces of lead in ancient Roman sediments and comparing them to modern samples suggest that while lead exposure was certainly higher than in pre-industrial societies, it was likely not at the catastrophic level once imagined. The scale formation and flow dynamics kept concentrations far below what would be needed to cause widespread poisoning. This does not mean there was no risk, particularly for those with private lead pipes where water might sit, or for workers in smelting operations. But the idea of lead pipes as a primary driver of Rome's fall is now viewed by many historians and scientists as an oversimplification. It is a powerful lesson in the complexity of interpreting the past. We see a material we know to be dangerous, and we project our modern understanding onto an ancient context without fully seeing the entire, interacting system they built around it. The Roman water network was not a single, fatal flaw, but a deeply interconnected set of solutions where one potential problem was often inadvertently solved by another ingenious feature. The real poison was not in the pipes, but in the far more prosaic challenges of political decay, economic strain, and military overreach. The lead pipe controversy ultimately reveals less about Roman folly and more about our own desire to find a simple, material cause for the unraveling of something as vast and complicated as an empire. A masterpiece of stone and gravity could not maintain itself. For an aqueduct to flow for 5 centuries, it required something far more fragile and human, a system of relentless, meticulous care. The true miracle of Roman water was not its construction, but its preservation. This was the work of the Cura Aquarum, the water administration, a dedicated bureaucracy that treated the city's water supply with the same seriousness as its legions or its treasury. At its head was a high-ranking official, often a former consul, a man like Sextus Julius Frontinus. His appointment was a signal of supreme importance, placing the city's hydration in the hands of someone with the authority to command resources and enforce the law. Frontinus did not just manage the water, he sought to understand it completely, and he left us the proof in his remarkable book, De Aqueductu. This was not a poetic history, but a practical field manual and a stunningly detailed accountability report. In its pages, he catalogued the precise dimensions, flow rates, and legal status of every aqueduct, exposing inefficiencies and cracking down on the theft of public water. His work reveals a central truth: the Roman system was engineered for transparency as much as for flow. It was built to be measured, audited, and defended. Beneath this administrative layer toiled the real guardians of the water, the aquarii. These were state-employed watermen, often slaves or freedmen, who formed the skilled maintenance corps. Their world was one of grit and constant vigilance. Their duties took them from the sun-drenched arcades to the pitch-dark tunnels far beneath the earth. Teams would regularly descend through those maintenance shafts to scrub the Speckus, the water channel, clearing away the mineral deposits and algae that could slow the precious gradient. They patrolled the countryside routes, watching for farmers who might illegally tap into the conduit to irrigate fields, or for tree roots threatening to crack the underground masonry. At the settling tanks, they operated the sluice gates, flushing out the accumulated silt to keep the water pristine. A crack in the channel, a blocked filter grate, a collapsed section of tunnel, all were emergencies demanding immediate response. These men were the immune system of the city, identifying and repairing failures before they could become catastrophes. They worked with a simple, profound understanding. A single blocked channel could leave an entire district without water, and in a city of 1 million, that was a recipe for unrest. This administrative and physical upkeep was a continuous, costly investment, a permanent line item in the imperial budget. It proved that the Romans grasped a concept modern societies still struggle with. Infrastructure is not a one-time achievement, it is a permanent relationship. You do not build an aqueduct, you adopt it. The stone arches were a birth, but the daily work of the aquarii was the long, unglamorous labor of keeping it alive. The system's 500-year lifespan is a testament to this philosophy of stewardship. It stands in silent rebuke to the idea of grand projects built and then forgotten. The water kept flowing because someone was always watching, always listening for the change in the current's song that signaled a problem. In this, the Roman water network finds its most enduring lesson. Technology alone is not civilization. Civilization is the will to care for that technology, to fund its caretakers, and to value the quiet, essential work of maintenance over the fleeting glory of groundbreaking. The true monument was not the arcade against the sky, but the endless, unseen labor that kept the water whispering through it season after season, generation after generation. The water did not simply arrive in Rome, it lived there. It flowed with a rhythm unlike anything in our modern world, a perpetual, unstoppable motion that defined the fourth principle of their entire hydraulic philosophy. The Roman system had no shut-off valves, no pressure regulators, and no nightly pause in service. From the moment it left the mountain spring to the second it splashed into a street basin, the water was in constant, gravity-fueled transit. This was not a network of pipes, it was a network of rivers, each one running day and night, year after year. The public fountains were not fed by taps, they were designed as permanent overflows. Water rushed into their carved basins and just as quickly spilled over the edges, draining into the street gutters to flush away waste. This continuous flow was a brilliant, if extravagant, solution to several critical problems. First and foremost, it guaranteed purity. Stagnant water is a breeding ground for illness, but water that never stops moving cannot stagnate. The relentless current prevented the growth of harmful organisms and algae within the channels and basins. Secondly, it acted as a perpetual cleaning service for the pipes themselves. Any tiny particles of silt or sediment that made it past the settling tanks were never allowed to settle again. They were swept along and eventually ejected from the system entirely. This self-cleaning feature dramatically reduced the frequency of major blockages. Finally, it created breathtaking simplicity in operation and maintenance. Without a single valve to turn or a pressure gauge to read, the system managed itself. The aquarii could focus on cleaning and repair, not on the complex daily choreography of allocating supply. The entire metropolis hummed to the sound of this endless, generous waste. For us today, raised in a world of conservation, metered usage, and concerns over scarcity, this seems almost incomprehensibly lavish. We are taught to see a dripping faucet as a failure. The Romans engineered their entire civilization around the idea that a dripping fountain was a success, a sign the system was alive and working. This always-on philosophy reveals a profound cultural mindset. It was a declaration of abundance, an assertion that through engineering and imperial will, they had transformed a limited natural resource into something that felt and functioned as infinite. They built not for efficiency, but for certainty, for the unshakable peace of mind that comes from knowing the water will never, ever stop. This confidence was woven into the daily soundscape of the city, the eternal background murmur of overflowing basins, a sonic monument to a world they had made permanently generous. Yet this magnificent certainty came at a cost measured not in coins, but in countless gallons. The sheer volume of water wasted was staggering. Modern estimates suggest that because of this overflow design, a significant portion of the aqueduct's flow, perhaps as much as half, never served a direct human purpose before draining into the Tiber. For the Romans, with multiple aqueducts feeding the city, this was an acceptable trade-off. The abundance secured by their stone rivers was so great that they could afford to use purity and simplicity as their guiding principles, even if it meant monumental spillage. It represents a historical crossroads in humanity's relationship with nature, a moment when a civilization, at the peak of its power, could look at a precious resource and see not a limit to be carefully managed, but a force to be gloriously unleashed. Their legacy is a double-edged lesson, a masterpiece of reliable public health built on a foundation of deliberate, engineered extravagance. This constant, generous flow was a political statement written in water. The aqueduct was never just a piece of infrastructure, it was a powerful instrument of soft power, a tool for emperors and elites to build loyalty and legitimize their authority. In a world without mass media, the most effective campaign advertisement was not a speech or a coin, but a public fountain that never ran dry. When a new emperor came to power, or when a wealthy patron sought to cement their legacy, they did not merely promise to govern well, they promised to build. And nothing demonstrated benevolent power more tangibly than financing a new aqueduct or restoring a crumbling one. The inscription on the Arch of Claudius, which celebrated the completion of the Aqua Claudia and the Annio Novus, makes this ambition crystal clear. It dedicates the structures to the Emperor Claudius, paid for from his own funds, and lists his many titles and conquests. The water is almost an afterthought. The real message is about imperial glory, generosity, and the enduring strength of the regime. By providing this most essential public good, a ruler was performing the most basic function of the state, caring for its people, and in return he earned their gratitude and, more importantly, their compliance. This was political patronage on a monumental scale. A new aqueduct did more than just bring water. It unlocked new possibilities for urban growth. It allowed for the expansion of the city into previously uninhabitable higher ground, enabling the construction of new residential neighborhoods, grand bath complexes, and lush imperial gardens. The Aqua Traiana, built by Emperor Trajan, directly enabled the development of the Transtiberum region across the river. The Aqua Alexandrina, centuries later, was built specifically to supply a massive new bath complex commissioned by Emperor Alexander Severus. Each new channel of water was a catalyst for development, creating jobs, raising property values, and stimulating the local economy. The emperor who brought the water was seen as the direct cause of this new prosperity. In this way, the water system became the physical manifestation of the social contract. The state provided security, order, and this fundamental sustenance, and in exchange, the citizens offered their labor, their taxes, and their political loyalty. The quiet, reliable splash of the fountain was the sound of that contract being renewed every single day. It was a brilliant, self-reinforcing cycle. Engineering success created political capital, which funded more engineering, which in turn created more stability. This transforms our understanding of those stone arches from mere feats of construction into active, strategic components of statecraft. They were not passive monuments, but dynamic tools for shaping society, directing growth, and broadcasting a message of capable, benevolent control across every hill and valley of the empire. The water's journey from mountain to mouth was therefore also a journey from imperial coffers to public affection, a liquid investment in the very idea of Rome itself. To understand the true scale of Rome's ambition, we must step back and see what the rest of the ancient world was building. Other civilizations were masters of water, but their goals were fundamentally different. In the vast deserts of Persia, engineers perfected the canat, a breathtakingly clever system of gently sloping underground tunnels that tapped into water trapped deep within mountain foothills. These were marvels of patient, communal labor, sometimes stretching for miles, bringing life-giving water to arid fields and small settlements. Yet their purpose was agricultural, designed to sustain local farms and villages, not to concentrate 1 million souls into a single, dense metropolis. Across the Mediterranean, the Greeks demonstrated profound hydraulic skill. On the island of Samos, the tunnel of Eupalinos, carved straight through a mountain in the 6th century before the Common Era, stands as a monument to geometric precision and daring. But like the elegant pipelines feeding the fountain house of ancient Athens, it served a singular, defined community, a city-state. The Roman achievement was not in being the first to move water, but in redefining why water was moved. Their system existed not for irrigation or for a single polis, but for the sole purpose of enabling a new form of human organization, the permanent megacity. It was an engine for urbanization on an unprecedented scale. What set Rome apart was a triple innovation, staggering physical scale, a core mission dedicated to public health and social stability, and its deep integration into the machinery of a centralized imperial state. The aqueducts were not local projects, they were directives from the capital, funded by imperial treasuries and managed by a professional bureaucracy that reported directly to the emperor. This transformed water from a local concern into a pillar of imperial policy. The Persian canat nourished a field, the Greek aqueduct supplied a fountain. The Roman aqueduct sustained an empire's beating heart, creating a blueprint for concentrated urban life that would not be seen again until the rise of the modern industrial city over 1,000 years later. That legacy is still written across the landscape, waiting to be read. Our understanding of this monumental system is not trapped in ancient texts alone. It is grounded in the physical ruins that endure, standing as silent, eloquent witnesses to the empire's reach. To walk among these remnants is to take a masterclass in Roman engineering, an open-air textbook written in stone and concrete. Just outside modern Rome, the towering, skeletal arcades of the Aqua Claudia march across the countryside. Here you can stand beneath arches that once carried the emperor's own water supply, tracing the precise lines of the massive travertine blocks, each one cut and fitted without mortar, held by gravity and sheer geometric perfection. The scale is humbling, a stark reminder that this was not a decorative facade, but a vital artery built to last 1,000 years. For a more intimate view of the system's inner workings, we travel south to Pompeii. Frozen in time by volcanic ash, the city preserves a perfect snapshot of Roman life, including a remarkably intact castellum divisorum. This local distribution tank, carved from solid stone, shows us the final, crucial step where the main aqueduct flow was divided into the city's 3 lead pipelines. You can see the channels, the settling basins, and the precise grooves for the bronze regulating plates. It is a frozen moment of municipal administration, a testament to the meticulous control they exerted over every drop. Perhaps the most breathtaking example of all lies not in Italy, but in the hills of southern France. The Pont du Gard is a bridge that transcends its function. This 3-tiered aqueduct spanning the Garden River demonstrates the provincial application of Roman technology at its most sublime. The lower tier carries a road, the middle supports the upper, and the highest carries the water channel itself, all built with locally quarried limestone. Its graceful, rhythmic arches are a study in harmony and proportion, proving that the empire's engineers could adapt their principles to any terrain, turning brute necessity into breathtaking art. These structures are not dead relics, they are classrooms without walls. By studying the precision of their stonework, the resilient, self-healing nature of their Pozzolana concrete, and the sheer, audacious ambition of their spans, we can reverse engineer the ingenuity that built them. They provide tangible, undeniable proof of the system's grandeur, a physical argument that what the Romans achieved was not myth, but measurable, enduring fact. They compel us to ask not just how they were built, but why their builders were so certain they would be needed for centuries to come. But the grandest arches and the deepest tunnels would have been impossible without a silent, grey revolution in a bucket. The true unsung hero of the entire Roman water network was not a tool or a design, but a material, a seemingly humble mixture they called opus cementitium. We know it today as Roman concrete, and its secret ingredient, a fine, dusty volcanic ash called Pozzolana, did something that defied the logic of every builder before them. It allowed stone to grow stronger in the one place it should crumble, underwater. This was not just an improvement, it was a material revolution that unlocked the physical reality of their hydrological dreams. Ordinary concrete, even today, requires dry conditions to cure properly. Submerge it and it turns to mush, but mix lime with this special volcanic ash from the hills around the Bay of Naples, add water and aggregate like rubble or broken brick, and you created a paste with almost magical properties. When this pozzolanic concrete was placed in water, a complex chemical reaction began. Instead of dissolving, it formed a dense, interlocking crystal structure that bonded fiercely with the surrounding stone, growing harder and more resilient with each passing year. It was a self-healing stone, a living material that thrived in the very element it was meant to defy. This hydraulic concrete became the invisible hand shaping Rome's water destiny. It allowed engineers to perform feats that were previously unthinkable. They could now build massive, stable bridge piers directly in the beds of rushing rivers, creating the unshakable foundations for aqueduct arcades. They could cast the waterproof linings for miles of underground aqueduct channels and the vast, cavernous cisterns that fed the bathhouses, creating seamless, impervious shells that held thousands of gallons without a drop seeping away. Its most dramatic application, however, was not in bringing water to the city, but in letting the city reach out to the sea. At Portus, the great artificial harbor built by Emperor Claudius and expanded by Trajan just outside Rome, engineers faced a monumental challenge. They needed to construct immense, curving breakwaters, moles, out into the open sea to protect merchant ships from the brutal Mediterranean storms. Using wooden forms, they poured this volcanic concrete directly into the turbulent salt water. As it cured and hardened beneath the waves, it created a permanent, monolithic arm of stone, a fortress against the ocean itself. Without this material, such harbor works would have been fragile, temporary assemblies of rock, constantly battered and eroded. With it, they built infrastructure meant to outlast empires. This innovation reframes our understanding of Roman engineering. The genius was not just in the grand vision or the elegant geometry of an arch. It was in the very stuff they built with, a material they could trust to perform miracles in the most hostile environments. The aqueduct was a masterpiece of design, but the Pozzolana concrete was the magic that allowed the design to touch the earth, to cross the river, and to resist the relentless press of time and tide. It turned ambitious blueprints into permanent, functioning reality. This humble gray mixture, more than any single emperor or architect, was the physical enabler of Rome's aquatic age, proving that sometimes the most profound revolutions are not found in ideas alone, but in the very ground you stand upon, waiting to be mixed, poured, and transformed. The city's survival could never depend on a single stone river. This introduces the fifth and final principle, the masterstroke of Roman foresight, redundancy. By the height of the empire, Rome was not served by one or two aqueducts, but by 11 major channels, each a monumental achievement in its own right, all converging on the capital. This was not merely accumulation, it was a deliberate, sophisticated strategy for urban resilience. Think of it as the empire building an immune system for its own heart. The Aqua Pier, the oldest, brought water from the nearby Alban Hills. The Aqua Marcia, famed for its cold, clear taste, came from farther east. The Aqua Claudia arrived from the distant Subiaco Valley. Each had its own source, its own unique route carved through the landscape. This multi-source design served multiple brilliant purposes. First and foremost, it provided an uninterrupted water supply. If one aqueduct was taken offline for essential maintenance, perhaps to repair a section of arcade damaged by a landslide, or if its source spring temporarily ran low, the other 10 could continue flowing. The city might feel a reduction in pressure, or certain baths might operate with shorter hours, but the public fountains would never run completely dry. This made the system virtually immune to sabotage or accidental failure. An enemy could not cripple Rome by cutting a single channel. They would have to find and destroy 11 separate stone arteries, a logistical impossibility. Beyond mere backup, this network allowed for a subtle, almost luxurious form of water management. Different aqueducts drew from different geological watersheds, meaning their waters had distinct mineral profiles and qualities. Frontinus, our meticulous water commissioner, noted these differences with the care of a master sommelier. The water of the Aqua Marcia was universally praised as the best for drinking, cold and refreshing. The Aqua Alciatina, in contrast, was warmer and murkier, considered inferior for consumption but perfectly adequate for filling the massive Normatia, the artificial lake used for staging mock naval battles or for irrigating the sprawling imperial gardens along the Tiber. This ability to allocate specific waters for specific purposes, drinking from one channel, bathing from another, and irrigating from a third, reveals a breathtaking level of systemic sophistication. They were not just managing volume, they were managing quality and appropriateness. This multi-route, multi-source grid transformed the water supply from a fragile lifeline into a robust, adaptable network. It ensured that the metropolis of 1 million people was never more than temporarily inconvenienced by the failure of any single component. In this principle, we see the culmination of Roman hydraulic philosophy. It was no longer about solving a problem, but about anticipating and neutralizing every possible threat to the solution. They engineered not just for function, but for permanence, not just for abundance, but for certainty. The quiet hum of the fountain was therefore guaranteed by a deep, silent calculus of risk, a web of stones so interconnected that it could never be completely severed. This final layer of planning turned their water system from a wonder into a perpetual promise. The constant flow from the public fountain was a universal right, but the moment water turned toward a private doorway, it entered the realm of commerce. This was the carefully calculated economics of Roman hydration, a system that balanced generous public welfare with shrewd fiscal reality. While any citizen could fill a jar at the street corner for free, piping that same water directly into a wealthy townhouse, a domus, was a privilege that came with a substantial recurring bill. The state did not charge for the water itself, which was considered a public resource, but for the right to access it privately. The tax was ingeniously simple and directly tied to consumption. It was based on the diameter of the lead pipe, the fistula, that connected the home to the main line. A wider pipe capable of carrying a greater volume cost significantly more. This created a visible, almost theatrical form of social stratification right within the home. The wealthy could enjoy the ultimate luxury of convenience, with water flowing into ornate marble basins in their sunlit atriums, perhaps even feeding a small, private fountain that gurgled as a symbol of their status. Meanwhile, just outside their walls, the vast majority of Romans living in the cramped insulae apartments continued the daily, laborious ritual of hauling heavy jars up countless dark stairs from the communal source. The sound of water in the city was thus layered, a public murmur in the streets underpinned by a private, purchased silence within the walls of the elite. This economic model extended beyond private villas to fuel the city's very industry. The state sold official water rights to commercial operations, creating a vital revenue stream. Fullers who operated workshops for cleaning and bleaching woolen cloth required vast quantities of water and pungent chemicals like aged urine. Tanneries processing animal hides had similar massive demands. By licensing a specific pipe diameter to these businesses, the city could both regulate a polluting industry, often relegating it to specific districts, and profit from its needs. Perhaps the most ingenious industrial application was the watermill. Roman engineers mastered the transfer of aqueduct water into steep, narrow chutes to turn mill wheels, creating the first large-scale mechanized flour production. These mills, like the massive complex later built on the Janiculum Hill, were essentially industrial tenants of the water system, paying for the hydraulic force that powered their grindstones. This commercial framework made the entire aqueduct network partially self-sustaining. The taxes from private pipes and the fees from industrial licenses created a dedicated fund that paid for the salaries of the aquarii, the maintenance crews, and the materials for repairs and expansions. It was a brilliant feedback loop. The very luxury and industry the water enabled helped fund its own perpetual care. What we see here is a sophisticated early example of a public-private partnership. The Roman state understood its duty to provide a baseline of health and stability through free public access, recognizing that a thirsty, restless populace was a threat to order. Yet they also possessed a clear-eyed understanding of practical finance. They monetized the convenience and economic potential their infrastructure created, ensuring the wealthy and the industrialists who benefited most directly contributed most to its upkeep. This was not a cynical exploitation of a necessity, but a pragmatic balancing act. It allowed them to maintain a colossal, non-revenue-generating public good, the street fountains, by charging for the privileges that grew from it. The system illustrates a profound Roman duality, a blend of civic duty and sharp administrative acumen. They managed water not just as engineers, but as economists and urban planners, weaving together social policy, commercial regulation, and fiscal sustainability into the very fabric of their stone rivers. This delicate equilibrium between free access and paid privilege would become one of the system's greatest strengths, and eventually a point of profound vulnerability as the empire's wider economy began to falter. But the aqueduct's gift extended far beyond the bathhouse and the fountain. Its flow held a different, more urgent kind of power, the power to feed a city. High on the Janiculum hill overlooking the Tiber, the water of the Aqua Traiana was put to work in a way that feels startlingly modern. Here, a special branch of the aqueduct was diverted not into a settling tank, but into a series of steep, narrow chutes. The engineers had created an artificial waterfall, a cascade of pure force. At the bottom of each chute, the torrent slammed into the paddles of a massive vertical water wheel, setting it into a groaning, relentless spin. This rotary motion was then transferred through wooden gears to turn heavy millstones, grinding grain into flour. This was the mills of the Janiculum, one of the earliest known examples of using aqueduct water for large-scale mechanical industry right inside a city. It transformed the serene, constant flow of the aqueduct into the rhythmic, grinding heartbeat of survival. This was not a small operation. The complex housed multiple mills working in concert, an early industrial park powered entirely by gravity-fed water. Its existence reveals a profound evolution in how the Romans viewed their hydraulic network. Water was no longer just a substance for cleansing and drinking. It had become a prime mover, an energy source that could be harnessed to perform essential, repetitive labor. The system now directly fueled the urban economy, turning the flow from the mountains into the very bread on a citizen's table. It created a direct, mechanical link between the engineering of the aqueduct and the most basic need of the population, sustenance. The critical importance of this link was revealed not in a time of peace, but in a moment of desperate siege. In the year 537, Gothic forces surrounding Rome executed a brilliant and brutal strategy. They did not just attack the walls, they targeted the lifelines, they cut the aqueducts, the great arcades fell silent, the fountains in the streets dried up, and the public baths became empty, echoing halls. But the crisis deepened far beyond thirst. With the aqueduct severed, the artificial waterfall on the Janiculum hill ceased. The water wheels ground to a halt. The millstones sat motionless, and the city's mechanized flour production collapsed. Rome, a metropolis built on imported grain, suddenly had no way to process it. The siege weapon was not just a sword or a catapult, it was the deliberate silencing of a machine. The Goths had understood something fundamental. They had not merely deprived Rome of water, they had severed the hydraulic nerve that powered a key part of its food supply. This event underscores the system's deep integration into the city's biological and economic metabolism. The aqueduct was not a luxury. It was infrastructure so critical that its failure could paralyze a core function of urban life. The mills on the Janiculum stand as a powerful testament to Roman innovation, but their silence in 537 speaks even louder, revealing the terrifying vulnerability that came with such profound dependence. The relentless flow of the aqueducts was a condition of existence for imperial Rome, a permanent fact as certain as the sunrise. Yet its permanence was an illusion, a fragile state sustained not by stone alone, but by the unbroken will of an empire. That will, in time, began to fracture. The slow, grinding decline of the Western Roman Empire is not just a story of barbarian invasions and political collapse. It is etched with startling clarity in the silent, crumbling arcades of its own aqueducts. As the central authority in distant Ravenna grew weaker, as the imperial treasury strained under endless crises, the funding for the Cura Aquarum, the water administration, dried up. The legions of aquarii, the maintenance crews, could no longer be paid or supplied. Their patrols of the countryside routes grew less frequent, then stopped altogether. This was not a dramatic, single catastrophe, but a quiet, relentless unraveling, Without constant care, the system's genius became its vulnerability. The underground Speckus channels, once scrubbed clean by diligent hands, began to choke with silt and thick mineral deposits, slowing the precious gradient to a trickle. Tree roots, left unchecked, sought out the moisture within the masonry, their slow, insistent pressure cracking stone joints that no one came to repair. Out in the open countryside, sections of the soaring arcades, destabilized by neglect or minor tremors, would collapse. A single fallen arch could block the channel for miles, turning an entire aqueduct into a stagnant, broken relic. The Goths' siege in 537, when they severed the channels, was a brutal, intentional blow. But the deeper tragedy was what happened, or rather, what did not happen after the siege ended. In the empire's prime, such damage would have sparked an immediate, state-funded reconstruction. Now, there was no state left with the capacity or the priority to respond. The aqueducts were not violently destroyed, they were simply abandoned, left to the patient, destructive work of weather and time. By the early Middle Ages, perhaps only 1 or 2 of the 11 great aqueducts still delivered a feeble stream into what remained of the city. The consequence of this hydraulic failure was stark, immediate, and deeply personal. Rome could no longer support 1 million people. Its population did not gradually decline, it plummeted, collapsing to a mere 30 or 40,000 souls by the 6th century. These survivors did not spread out across the 7 hills. They retreated, clustering in the low-lying areas near the one reliable water source left to them, the Tiber River. The city's geography inverted. The lofty neighborhoods on the Esquiline and Palatine hills, once prized for their breezes and views, were abandoned as ghost towns of empty insulae, their silent streets a testament to a lost age of abundance. Life contracted back to the riverbanks, to a pre-urban existence defined once again by water scarcity. The grand public baths, those marvels of social and hydraulic engineering, fell into disuse, their empty pools filling with rubble. The constant, comforting murmur of the street fountains was replaced by an eerie, profound silence. This correlation is impossible to ignore. The city's monumental size was not an accident of history. It was a direct, engineered outcome of its water supply. When that supply failed, the city itself shrank back to the scale that its local environment could naturally sustain. The aqueducts were not merely a convenient utility or a symbol of luxury. They were the foundational pillar upon which the very idea of the ancient megacity had been built. Their loss did not just make life less comfortable, it made the previous form of life physically impossible. It proved in the most concrete terms that Roman civilization was not just expressed through its engineering, it was constituted by it. The silent, broken arches standing against the sky were not just ruins, they were the skeletal remains of a specific way of human life, a way that vanished when the water finally, irrevocably, stopped flowing. The silent arcades of Rome speak to a challenge we have not left behind. Our modern megacities, from Sao Paulo to Cape Town to Chennai, now face their own versions of the ancient crisis, pressured by climate uncertainty and the demands of millions. The Roman blueprint, etched in stone and policy, offers not a technical manual but a philosophical one for urban survival. Their first lesson was in source hunting. They did not settle for the nearest or easiest water. They sought out the purest and most reliable springs, fiercely protecting those distant watersheds. Today, we understand this as safeguarding our upstream reservoirs and aquifers from pollution and overuse, recognizing that the quality of a city's life begins far beyond its borders. Their second principle was redundancy. 11 aqueducts meant no single point of failure could cripple the metropolis. In an era of deepening droughts and infrastructure strain, this translates to diversifying our water portfolios, combining river sources with recycled water, desalination, and conserved groundwater, building a network resilient to shock. Then there is the elegant logic of gravity. Where geography allows, gravity-fed systems move water without a single watt of energy. A lesson in sustainable design our power-hungry pumping stations would do well to remember. Perhaps their most profound insight was institutional. They created a dedicated, transparent administration for water, funded by a mix of public duty and smart economics, ensuring the system's care was someone's permanent job. This underscores that technology alone is not enough. Equitable distribution and quality control demand vigilant, accountable governance. Our pipes are made of different materials, and our treatment plants can purify what the Romans never could, but the core equation remains unchanged. A dense urban population requires a guaranteed, clean, and justly shared water supply. The Roman experiment proved that a megacity is not a natural occurrence, it is a hydraulic achievement. When we invest in long-term, robust water infrastructure, we are not merely laying pipe, we are making the fundamental choice to sustain a civilization. The ultimate lesson from those broken arches is that the price of abandoning this duty is not just inconvenience, it is the quiet, certain contraction of the world we have built. The Hollywood version of Rome is a city of gleaming marble and endless arches, but its water story is often told with more drama than truth. Let us clear away a few persistent myths, because the reality is far more impressive than the fiction. The first image to correct is the aqueduct itself. We picture a single, unbroken line of stone arches marching from mountain to metropolis. In truth, those iconic arcades were only used where absolutely necessary to cross a valley or plain. For the vast majority of their length, the aqueducts were hidden from view, tunneling through bedrock or buried in deep trenches. The arches were the spectacular exception, not the rule, a solution reserved for the moments when gravity's perfect slope demanded a bridge. This makes the engineering more pragmatic and, in a way, more brilliant. They built for efficiency, not for show. Then there is the water itself. The idea of an open stone channel carrying crystal-clear drinking water for 50 miles under the blazing sun is a recipe for stagnation and contamination. The Romans knew better. While the final arcade sections near the city often had open channels, the majority of the Speckus was covered with stone slabs or vaulting. This crucial design protected the water from sunlight, which would encourage algae from leaves and debris and from animals. It was a covered conduit, a protected pipeline, ensuring the water arrived as clean as it left the spring. They were not naively channeling an open river through the sky. They were carefully guarding a precious cargo every step of the way. This brings us to the most famous modern fear, the specter of lead poisoning from the pipes. As we touched on earlier, the science and the system itself complicate this simple narrative. The widespread, catastrophic poisoning of the Roman populace is a dramatic story, but the evidence suggests a more nuanced reality. The hard, mineral-rich water deposited that protective scale inside the pipes, and the constant flow minimized contact time. While lead exposure was certainly higher than in pre-industrial times, and while those working in lead smelting faced serious risks, the aqueduct system as a whole was not the silent killer of popular imagination. The Romans benefited from a series of unintended safeguards born from their own engineering choices, turning a potential flaw into a managed, if not entirely eliminated, risk. Finally, the legendary Cloaca Maxima. It is often portrayed as a vast, city-wide sanitary sewer, with waste from every home flushing directly into the Tiber. The truth is more limited and, again, more logical. The cloaca was primarily a storm drain and a means to drain the swampy lowlands of the Forum. Its monumental architecture was about managing floodwater, not sewage from individual homes. Most Romans in their crowded insulae relied on chamber pots and cesspits, with waste collected or sometimes dumped into street gutters that were then flushed by overflow from the public fountains. The Cloaca handled the runoff from that process, but it was not a direct sewer line from every residence. It was a macro solution for a macro problem, keeping the city center dry and managing the bulk flow of urban runoff. By stripping away these Hollywood embellishments, we do not diminish Roman achievement, we clarify it. We see a civilization not of magical, flawless technology, but of supremely pragmatic problem solvers. They worked within the limits of their materials and their understanding, building a system that was sophisticated, resilient, and meticulously tailored to the social and environmental realities of their world. Their genius lies not in mythical perfection, but in the remarkable, functional reality. They constructed a reality that sustained 1 million people for centuries. This clearer picture makes their actual accomplishments, grounded in stone, gravity, and daily labor, all the more worthy of our awe. The story of Roman water is not just written in stone, it is a detective story. Our understanding of this vast, silent system comes from piecing together a multidisciplinary puzzle where ancient texts meet modern lasers and chemical analysis. The first and most direct witnesses are the ruins themselves. Standing beneath the arches of the Aqua Claudia, we can measure the blocks, trace the channel's slope, and see the tool marks left by the masons. These physical remains are the skeleton of the system, undeniable proof of scale and method. But a skeleton alone cannot tell us how the body moved. For that, we need the words of the men who managed it. We are extraordinarily fortunate to have the detailed report of Sextus Julius Frontinus, the water commissioner. His book, De Aqueductu, is not a dry history. It is a practical field manual written by a frustrated administrator. In its pages, he meticulously lists every aqueduct, its source, its length, and its legal status. He complains about illegal taps and documents the exact dimensions of the pipes. Frontinus gives us the system's vital statistics and, more importantly, its personality, revealing the daily challenges of keeping 1 million people hydrated. He is joined by the architect Vitruvius, whose writings provide the engineering philosophy, the ideal criteria for spring water, and the principles of gradient and construction. These texts are the operation manuals left behind like a time capsule. Yet writings and ruins only go so far. The finer details of daily life and ownership come from smaller, more intimate artifacts. Stamped into the soft lead of the distribution pipes, the fistulae, are often names and markings. These are not graffiti, they are official stamps indicating the pipe's owner, the manufacturer, or the emperor in whose reign it was cast. They are property tags allowing the water administration to track who had a legal right to a private connection and to clamp down on unauthorized use. A single lead pipe fragment with the stamp of a wealthy senator's family becomes a direct link between the monumental system and an individual household, proving the economic hierarchy of Roman water in a way no text ever could. Even the chemistry of the system has left its own evidence. Inside those lead pipes, the thick, rocky scale that built up over centuries, the Creta Aquaria, is a mineral archive. By analyzing its layers, modern scientists can determine the precise chemistry of the water that flowed through it for generations. They can trace its mineral source, understand its hardness, and even model how effectively that scale would have insulated the water from the lead, providing concrete data to settle the long debate about poisoning. The latest chapter in this detective story is written from the sky. Modern technology like LiDAR scanning uses lasers to map the ground surface with incredible precision, stripping away forests and modern buildings to reveal the subtle, ghostly imprint of the past. From an aircraft, LiDAR can trace the faint, straight line of a buried aqueduct trench across miles of farmland, or map the almost imperceptible gradient of an ancient road that once served as a maintenance path for the aquarii. It allows archaeologists to see the entire route as a single, planned feature in the landscape, understanding how the engineers chose the most efficient path from mountain to city. Each of these pieces, the crumbling arch, the frustrated commissioner's report, the stamped pipe, the mineral crust, and the laser map, is a single clue. Historians, archaeologists, and engineers must act like detectives at a vast, ancient crime scene, but the crime is simply the passage of time. Their job is to reassemble the blueprint of a city's veins and arteries from fragments and whispers. This painstaking process is a mystery in itself, a testament to two great human endeavors: the Roman drive to record and build with precision, and our own enduring curiosity to understand how they did it. The final picture that emerges is not a static diagram, but a dynamic, living system brought back to life one clue at a time. That final, enduring lesson is written in the quiet of the abandoned hills. The hydrological engineering of ancient Rome was far more than a collection of aqueducts and sewers. It was the living circulatory system of history's first true megacity. We have traced the journey of a single drop from the pure, cold spring in a distant forest, through the silent, buried channel and across the soaring arcades, into the bustling heart of a city of 1 million souls. We saw it pause in the settling tank, be divided with bureaucratic precision at the water castle, and then flow outward to fulfill its many destinies. It sustained public health at the humble street fountain, fueled culture and community in the vast public baths, and powered industry at the water-wheel-driven mill. This was not a single invention, but a masterpiece of interconnected pragmatism, political will, and unrelenting administrative diligence. It was a system that understood water not as an end, but as a means to enable a specific form of human life, dense, urban, and civilized. The legacy of that system whispers a crucial, urgent lesson to our modern world, a world facing its own profound challenges of scarcity and sustainability. Civilization does not merely exist near water. It flourishes only where water flows both freely and wisely, where its management is seen not as a cost, but as the foundational investment in everything that follows. The silent, broken arches are a monument to this truth, their very ruination proving how essential they once were. As you turn off this video, take a moment to consider the invisible network that brings water to your own home. That simple act of turning a tap is the direct descendant of a Roman vision, a 2,000-year-old dream of abundance, health, and order, made real by stone and gravity. It is a legacy we inherit with every glass we fill. If you found this journey through the veins of an ancient metropolis compelling, subscribe for more explorations into the hidden systems and profound mysteries that built our world. We would love to hear your thoughts, so let us know in the comments which Roman hydraulic innovation astounds you the most.